Good, let's check out here Project Gunship again. Yeah, seems like a lot of development went into it. We have now scenarios here from Vietnam, Afghanistan. Zombie stuff, not really that interesting for me, but yeah, definitely want to do a playthrough. Start with a tutorial.
Each AC-130 gunship is outfitted with a sensor or camera, which is what is displayed on your screen. We are currently in the J model, which has a FLIR or forward-looking infrared sensor that can view heat radiation, displayed as either white or black. You can change the FLIR mode by pressing the default X key, which will toggle between white-hot and black-hot modes. When white-hot is selected, objects that have a lot of heat will display white, while cold objects would be seen black. Changing to black-hot will invert this, causing hot to be viewed as black and cold to be viewed as white. Go ahead and toggle between the two modes. Deciding on which to use ultimately comes down to preference, and whichever gives the operator more clarity. Some of the older variants do not have a FLIR sensor, but have a night observation device or NOD. This sensor illuminates low levels of light and does not have separate settings, so what you see is what you get. For both the FLIR and NOD sensors, you can adjust the brightness using the num key 1 and 7, and the contrast using num key 3 and 9. Now, moving on to controlling the sensor. By default, the sensor's movement is made to emulate the motion of a joystick. This means the movement is relative. The further the mouse is moved away from the center of the screen, the more the sensor will move in that indicated direction. This setting can be changed in the options menu if desired, but having relative movement can make it easier to track moving targets. Constant mouse movement. The speed of the sensor's movement is modified using the G and V keys. If you are having trouble getting used to the relative movement of the sensor, a lower sensor speed will help you maintain control. If you need the sensor to maintain a visual on a particular location, you can lock the sensor view by using the T key. The system will lock and automatically adjust the sensor's angle to maintain visual on that specific point. That is everything you need to know as it relates to operating the sensor. Let's go over the sensor's HUD elements. This is the mission timer that begins at the mission start to track time over target. This is the aircraft bank angle indicator, showing the aircraft's current roll angle. It has 3 notches that indicate 0, 25, and 45 degrees bank angles. Now you have the sensor's crosshairs and compass. The compass will maintain cardinal directions as it relates to the ground, despite the aircraft and sensor's rotation. This shows the distance in meters from the sensor to the point centered in the crosshair. Various warning indicators will be present here when active. This shows the current count of countermeasure flares in the aircraft. This indicates which mode the FLIR sensor is active. This shows the various settings of the sensor, including sensor speed, sensor magnification, sensor brightness, and sensor contrast. This indicator shows the vertical traversal range of the sensor enslaved gun. The sensors are represented by a V, while the gun is a ball. When the gun is slaved, if the gun is not aligned with the sensor, you will see a variance in vertical location between the two markers. This indicator shows the horizontal traversal range of the sensor enslaved gun. Same as the last, the sensor and gun are represented by a V and ball marker. The hash mark at the 9 o'clock position indicates the direct left vector of the aircraft, or the center of the horizontal traversal range. This represents the impact dispersion of the current selected munition expressed in meters. In other words, it is the distance you can expect rounds to stray from your point of aim, so long as your guns are properly tweaked. This indicates in seconds how long it will take the selected munition to impact. Remember, munitions have varying muzzle velocities, so some munitions may take less or more time than others. Now, you have lots of information about the activated gun and munition here. On the top row, you have the gun name, munition type, munition name, and munition count. The center row has the fuse name and type. Then finally, the gun mode, whether it be semi-auto or full auto. Additionally, we have the prograde indicator, which also indicates where the slaved gun is in its traversal range in relation to the screen. If the marker reaches the edges of the screen, then the slaved gun is at its maximum traversal range, either horizontally or vertically. If the marker is visible on screen, your gun should be within their limits to be slaved to the sensor. Finally, we have on-screen markers that can be placed to improve our situational awareness. The first is the nav marker, which indicates the center of the aircraft's orbit. We also have markers to show friendly and enemy positions. These are labeled as FM or friendly marker and HM or hostile marker. The crew will set these whenever it is appropriate to maintain situational awareness over the AO. Lastly, it is important to know that some of these HUD elements may not be available to earlier gunship variants, but all functionality remains the same. This concludes the summary of the HUD.
Man, really good, really good. I remember playing the early version. And the voiceovers are really good, but I already checked out as the new voiceovers of some of the missions. This here is now the state-of-the-art AC simulator.
Okay, let's go over slave gun operation. Slaving the gun to the sensor or activating the system to aim the gun at the sensor's crosshair is what makes the gunship so effective, but it has its limitations. The sensor itself is on a gimbal that allows it to traverse 360 degrees horizontally and 90 degrees vertically, meaning you can look anywhere around and below the aircraft at any time. The guns, however, are fixed on the left side of the aircraft and are limited in their vertical and horizontal traversal range. Gun misalignment occurs when the guns are not aiming at the sensor's crosshair because of one reason or another. This often happens when moving the sensor quickly. The gun's traversing speed is less than the sensor's, so a slight misalignment might occur. Target at an angle that is beyond the traversal range of the guns will result into the same. This becomes an issue when misalignment occurs while attempting to engage a target. Firing guns that are misaligned will cause rounds to impact somewhere not intended. This can result in collateral damage and failed missions, so it is important to always be aware of any misalignment. There are several indicators that will help you know when guns are misaligned and how they are misaligned. The first is the warning indicator that appears here. Although this doesn't tell you why the gun is misaligned, but it does indicate that the misalignment has occurred. We then have the traversal indicators that show where the sensor and gun is in their vertical and horizontal traversal range. These can directly indicate why the gun is misaligned by seeing horizontally or vertically how the V marker is offset from the ball marker. Similarly, the prograde indicator will always communicate not only if there is misalignment, but in which direction they are misaligned. If the prograde marker moves to one of the edges of the screen, the guns have reached their traversal limit in that direction. Vertical misalignment often occurs when the gunship doesn't have a deep enough bank angle to allow the guns to traverse low enough to aim at the target. You can adjust your aircraft's bank angle using the default B and H keys. The angle is adjusted in increments of 5 degrees. With the bank angle at 0 degrees, attempt to get guns on target at hostile marker 1. You'll notice the guns cannot get aligned on the target because the aircraft's bank is not steep enough. Now using the B key, change the aircraft's bank angle past 20 degrees to allow the gun to be aligned. 2 armed. Gun 2 armed, gun 1 armed. Gun 2 armed, gun 1 armed. Gun 2 armed. Rounds on target, it is important to understand the various forces that are at play on the munition during flight. Each of these can be toggled on and off if desired, but let's go over them so you know what to expect. The first to consider is gravity. Depending upon the launch angle of the munition, it will determine how much influence gravity will have on it. If the munition is fired straight downward, There would be no influence on the impact from gravity, as the round is moving in the direction of gravity itself. Conversely, if the munition is fired parallel with the horizon, maximum influence from gravity would be applied to the munition. So when gauging how much to offset your aim to accommodate gravity, you must know the angle at which the gun is firing. The next most influential piece is the wind. Knowing the wind speed and wind direction will help you gauge how the munition will be influenced in its trajectory. Following this, you have what I'll call the horizontal velocity drift, or initial momentum. Because the aircraft is moving at about 300 miles per hour, the munition will begin its trajectory with this same momentum, causing the round to strafe in the direction of the aircraft's movement. This will cause the impact to shift in the direction the aircraft is flying when fired. Lastly, you need to account for what is called the Coriolis effect, or the effect of the Earth's rotation on the munition. Because the Earth is rotating in a west to east direction, rounds fired at longer distances from the air will impact to the west of their given target.
Jimmy, that is called
Modern Warfare, yes baby. Effect will have, but it is
Coriolis effect.
Now that we've covered the influences of the munitions trajectory, let's now talk about impact ballistics and the different types of munitions you'll use. First, there are three damaging effects that can come from any given munition: direct damage, indirect damage, and concussive damage. Direct hits inflict the most damage, which is relative to the size of the munition. Both a 20mm round and a 105mm will instantly kill enemy infantry, but the 105mm transfers much more damage to the target because of its size, making it more effective against larger and harder targets like vehicles or buildings. Indirect damage, or shrapnel damage, is applied to a target relatively based upon its proximity to the impact and the munition's size. Larger munitions like the 105 have more metallic mass, converting into much more shrapnel compared to smaller munitions. This enables larger munitions to be more effective hitting targets indirectly with shrapnel over further distances. The 105mm and larger munitions can cause concussive damage to targets simply due to the amount of explosives found within the munition. This means, regardless of a direct or indirect hit, infantry and vehicles can be killed or destroyed simply by being within a specific distance to the impact. Looking down at Hostile Marker 1, you can see displayed for each munition size their shrapnel ranges. Remember, targets within the shrapnel range doesn't necessarily mean a kill, but the closer the target is to the impact point, the greater chance that more shrapnel will hit the target, thus being more effective. There are essentially three different munition types: high explosive incendiary, and armor piercing. High explosive and high explosive incendiary are essentially the same, but with an added incendiary effect to help start fires on vehicles. Armor-piercing rounds do not produce any shrapnel, but they are more effective against armored targets. Using the correct type of munition is important to remain effective. Additionally, there are two different fuse types that can be used: point detonation and airburst or proximity detonation. Point detonation rounds explode on impact, while airburst rounds explode above the ground, making them more effective at killing soft targets. The 30 Mike and 105 Mike are the only guns that have airburst munitions available to them. Situation should always dictate which munition to use. It can be the difference between mission success and failure. Be sure to carefully select the right munition to effectively complete the objective. This concludes this section on munition ballistics. Let's talk about the fire control computer and tweaking the guns. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key.
Nice, yeah, but Gee, my computer crashed my Windows 98 AC version, yeah. But that, man, crazy, yeah, that game is... I really love it, what I see here, that they go those lengths. Finally we have a really authentic here AC gunship simulator, it seems. And I remember playing that in the beginning, and that dude then went, yeah, the zombie, okay, cool. But those zombies, man, everybody comes with a zombie mode. But now there are a ton of historical scenarios which we will play, but I want to go through the tutorial, it's very entertaining. Also the voiceovers, the dude absolutely outperformed Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare AC gunship off. And that is really like the real footage. I would like to know how to tweak. Let's try it one more time, but I think...
Let's talk about the fire control computer and tweaking the guns. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key. You can open the fire control computer by using the default O key.
Unfortunately,
you can open the fire control computer by using the default O key.
It seems to be broken. Wait, there's the keys. On-screen input buttons for keyboard-less setups. I want to see that. Also. I can already hear it in the background because I made a video and said, yeah, the first voiceovers were good, and but it could be better if you watch the videos. You should get an idea how stuff is communicated. I think no, I don't know. Was I contact with this guy or perhaps with somebody else? Because somebody else also made a gunship, but it was for an arcade game. But that guy completely blew all expectations out of the water. Compared now, the Modern Warfare mission is kindergarten. Here. Yeah, okay. We'll handle it without. Not bad, yeah. If you exit the game, you see all gunships that lost personnel, also really cool. And not that they lost their lives, but to pay tribute to that.
Okay, let's get some rounds downrange. Down towards hostile marker 1, look for any infantry targets to engage. After you've knocked out 25 targets, we'll move on to engaging vehicles.
Left marker out. No.
Got one armed.
I think that dude got... Yeah. Man. Absolutely, 5 stars, yeah.
Now let's move on to vehicles. We'll conclude this section after you've successfully destroyed 10 vehicles. Gun 2 armed. Gun 1 armed.
That stuff here, dude pulled off. Yeah, man, that is the armor mission on. I mean, what would be great is some sort of interruption animations, yeah. I mean, there is of course a chance if what I'm 40 mic impacts beside you that you might be still combat or mobility effective. Yeah, absolutely. But I think what would make this thing even more authentic and especially also more impactful from the experience is if you would have people that drop onto the ground, try to stand up, struggle perhaps with it. Yeah. I mean, it is this very brutal stuff we see in the Ukraine after FPV, kamikaze or grenade strikes. I mean, right now they're basically running until they are finished. Some of those animations that dudes drop, I now try to pick up their weapons, crawling, because in this, yeah, but I tell you, in this vile, most operators would continue to fire, I guess. That is simply as quickly as possible in order not to raise any questions. Stuff what we see in the Ukraine, yeah, where they specifically fly out FPV drones to kill wounded. Yeah. It simply is, I don't know, really hard to swallow. But yeah, stuff like this, dudes drop onto the ground, perhaps stand up, continue running, perhaps struggle with standing up, perhaps want to stand up but can't, drop, crawling, stuff like that. And not only this 100 to 0, I got hit by shrapnel or whatever, which could be, you get hit by shrapnel, but you're full of adrenaline, you're running, you might be bleeding or whatever, you might have even terminal damage, lethal, but you might be still operating. But perhaps in seconds or minutes it will be over. I guess that would also make simply the presentation even more visceral. But yeah, here the skipping and everything, it's also not over the top that those dudes explode in 20 gips or whatever. That is definitely, man, that you pull it off. That is crazy good so far.
Gun 2 armed. Gun 2 armed.
Let's try out the laser. Okay. So not working on mobile targets. Okay.
Gun 2 armed.
hits after impact's really good. Ach, Alter. That thing got vaporized.
Gun one armed. Gun two armed.
They're firing towards us. Yeah, crazy that dude dropped there. Happens. Shot now.
Gun one armed.
Yeah, you might say this, but yeah, shit like that happens. I mean, it's what this vile footage of that drone warfare has shown in Ukraine. People getting propelled, yeah.
Gun one armed. Gun two armed. Gun one armed.
And it looks exactly like that. I mean, it's of course not always, not every explosion ends up as stuff like that, but definitely.
Good work. This concludes the unguided munition target practice.
Damn it, man.
Now, let's talk about utilizing the laser designator for guided munition targeting. All gunships are outfitted with laser designators to direct guided munitions, but only the W and J models carry their own guided munitions for use. There are two different ways you can activate the laser, and they each serve a specific purpose. The first is active tracking, which will slave the laser to your sensor and allow it to move along with your sensor. You do this by using the default right mouse button. You'll need to hold the button down to keep it active, as it will automatically turn off after releasing the button. This is helpful when attempting to track moving targets, as you can keep the laser on the target as it moves. The second method will activate the laser on a specific point. This is done using the default L key. This is good to use when the target is static, which you can laze and not be required to continue looking at the target. To deactivate the laser, you can simply press the key again. It is important to note you cannot fire a guided munition if your laser is not active, and deactivating the laser when a munition is in the air will cause the munition to lose direction and possibly cause collateral damage. Be sure to keep the laser active until the munition has impacted to prevent any strays. Guided munitions can be very accurate and should be used when accuracy is paramount. Remember, we only have so many on board, so be sure to use only when the situation calls for them. This concludes this section. Now it's time to engage some targets in the next section. Okay, let's first practice engaging on static targets. Find the hostile marker 1, activate the laser, and engage with the Hellfire. Nice shot. Now, a vehicle. You missed. Re-engage. You missed. Re-engage. Re-engage.
Yeah, the mission doesn't reset. I might do a reset because there was still all this stuff from the previous tutorial on the map. But yeah, crazy good. Would have never expected that this game will see such progress. Amazing.
Okay, let's first practice engaging on static targets. Find the hostile marker 1, activate the laser, and engage with the Hellfire. Too armed. Nice shot. Now, a vehicle. You missed. Re-engage. You missed. Re-engage. Okay, now keep an eye out for moving targets and engage at will. We'll go until you are out of hellfires. Good shooting. Guided munitions allow you to engage accurately from any range, so take advantage of them. This concludes this section. Okay, let's get started on anti-air threats and countermeasures. The enemy has only a few ways to reach out and touch us, so we need to be prepared to deal with any threats that come our way. The first is large caliber weapons that would be fired directly towards us. Although it is difficult for them to hit a moving target at such a distance, they will eventually. When encountering these, either static weapons emplacements or mounted on vehicles, you need to prioritize them and get rounds on target ASAP to silence those guns. Second, they use heat-seeking missile systems in the man-pads or man-portable air defense systems. When fired, these will actively track the heat signatures of our aircraft until impact. We can utilize flares to create additional sources of heat that can confuse the missile's tracking system and cause it to miss. To fire off flares, you use the default F key. Each button press will launch 3 flares in various directions behind the aircraft. You have a limited number of flares, which you can see on your HUD here. When a missile is launched around the aircraft, our MAW system will make an audible warning noise that sounds like this. When you hear that, you need to act quickly or you may get smoked. It is important to know these heat tracking missile systems are looking for the largest heat source in their field of view. So the closer a missile gets to the aircraft, the less likely flares will be able to influence it. So you need to make sure you are firing off flares quickly once you hear the warning tone that smoke is in the air. You can also proactively fire flares ahead of any missile launches to cause the missiles to never lock on the aircraft to begin with. With some practice and good awareness, these threats should be easy to deal with and shouldn't be much of a hindrance to your missions. That concludes this section. Now let's practice being engaged.
I mean, it is of course now a game, I understand, it's of course difficult to provide a challenge for AC-130 simulator despite, I don't know, hordes of enemies, which is not always great. I think also finding something and engaging it properly is a good... But on the other hand, nobody would put those gunships into service. That's also why they currently have the SOP. They only operate at night. I think they do that since the Gulf War. That was the last time, I think, where AC gunship was shot down during daylight. Or was it already in Vietnam War? In Vietnam War they lost the most to anti-air and everything. That's why they stopped using them at daylight and rather at night and try to use the tech superiority. It is of course only working against asymmetric enemies. If you have a peer enemy, if let's say the Ukrainians or the Russians would operate AC gunships, things would look very different. And you might get downed by whatever. And just because you have flares on board, it's not a guarantee that you might spoof even manpad systems or shorted systems. And they of course have logic programmed into that. They're not always looking for the biggest heat source. That is not correct. They of course have some sort of logic in order to try to distinguish between fake flare targets, fake targets. I mean, there's also systems where aircraft carry something behind. That is the new, or even launch missiles. That is the new stuff. Launching decoy aircraft or decoy missiles, or carrying even decoys behind them, like naval ships. If you would get engaged by manpads, in reality you would GTFO. Or you would immediately eliminate the threat, but you wouldn't stay there. Small arms fire or machine gun fire, that is of course quite a danger, especially if they operate thermals. But normally those ACs operate quite at altitudes, and of course also in darkness, to make that more challenging or even impossible. But yeah, it's of course always a danger operating such a aircraft. And again, against a peer, that might work in Vietnam, Afghanistan, even in the Gulf War to some extent. But that is not what I consider peer enemies. If, let's say, the Ukrainians would, I already talked about that. Things would look... I doubt that you, for example, in that conflict could effectively and safely employ an AC gunship. That would be way too dangerous. But yeah, okay, I understand it from a game perspective, to provide you a challenge and whatever. But you would never assume that you can spoof missiles. The first and best protection is that you will never get fired upon manpads. Let's say in Afghanistan, if they would report... I mean, manpads also don't... most manpads don't have thermals. I mean... AC gunship... what is the typical operational altitude? It's a slow-moving target. I mean, manpads could probably reach out, or shore it. If there would be shore it in an area, you would never send in a gunship. Way too dangerous. Are we still talking about a turboprop aircraft? A big one. Which... we're not talking about fast movers, some jet that pops up from the terrain altitude in order to quickly make a bombing run and GTFO,
Okay, let's get started on anti-air threats and countermeasures. The enemy has only a few ways to reach out and touch us, so we need to be prepared to deal with any threats that come our way.
But yeah, of course can happen, man. That's why they carry those flares and probably also Chef. Also about getting warned, I mean, manpads usually... I mean, there's also modern manpads that might use other technology, but they operate on passive infrared. So the radar warning receiver will not pick it up. Some modern aircraft have all aspect, whatever, optical, infrared, whatever signature detectors in order to detect launch, and might warn you of a manpad launch, but it's also not a 100% guarantee. That missile might then pick into you without you ever getting warned. As countless aircraft got downed by manpad, dudes didn't realize until impact, because it is a passive system, doesn't send out any emission, despite of course the launch signature, the heat and the pub smoke or whatever they create, but it's not really that much. But some modern aircraft employ those detectors, but they are not 100% foolproof. They might fail to detect, so you always need to use Mark 1 eyeballs, but that might be also simply too late. You will never see the missile incoming, it's really hard to spot. There's not some smoke behind the missile like in those movies. It's a bit smoke past when they launch, and then they propel up to a speed, and then they use that energy to come towards you. That's why what makes especially... but on the other hand, they work only on lower altitudes and lower speed. That's what makes them dangerous. You will never notice that they're coming towards you, or might fail to notice, and you your technology might also fail to notice. And that's what made, for example, the Stinger so effective in Afghanistan, but also here in the Ukraine war, where they stopped using especially helos, but also ground aircraft like the Sukhoi 25s in 2 offensive rows because simply too dangerous, especially fighting against a peer, against a faction that is basically on the same tech level like you. And things look quite different. You can't compare that to the history of the US warfare, which in modern history only were fighting asymmetric factions. Iraq, sure, they had a ton of shit, but that army was definitely not on peer. Also half of the world came there, and those dudes, those soldiers and everything. I mean, there were some engagements, yeah, but I mean, in both Iraq wars or Vietnam or Afghanistan. Modern history, the US was not fighting any peer enemy, but a lot of assumptions or tactics are based on this experience, which can lead, of course, to some biased view and also to some misconceptions, which proved true in the Ukraine war. Yeah? Where also NATO tactics and game-changer tanks failed to make even a couple of clicks while they were planning to drive down to the Black Sea. Some of those tactics, Cold War tactics and whatever, failed. Also aerial tactics simply failed the modern battlefield or specific circumstances. Yeah? Air power worked out like crazy in the Gulf War. Absolutely nuked away the Iraqis, but failed to subdue the Serbian forces in Operation Allied Force in the Yugoslav breakup wars. Because those dudes were a bit smart, not a bit smarter, I don't know. It's also depending on a lot of conditions, terrain and everything, but Serbian forces were definitely using tactics, on-off switching, changing, and yeah, air power alone couldn't subdue them. Yeah? It always depends. It's not some formula.
Okay, let's get to practicing some basic countermeasures. First, let's deal with direct fire weapons. Around holster marker 1, a random weapon system will appear and begin firing at you. Take it out before it scores any hits on us. Gun 1 armed.
Should we snipers? Was that yes. Oh, crazy, man. Okay. Man, that was a precise ZSU. I mean, they of course need to observe us in the night. For example, also if they would incorporate stuff like moon and everything. But those dudes, man, not bad, yeah? 2 bursts down.
Okay, let's get to practicing some basic countermeasures. First, let's deal with direct fire weapons. Around holster marker 1, a random weapon system will appear and begin firing at you. Gun 1 armed. Take it out before it scores any hits on us.
Get off the gun.
Try to identify and engage the target to keep them from engaging us. If any missiles get in the air, be sure to protect us with flares. Proactively firing flares can be helpful when you are expecting a missile launch. Here we go.
Flare. Flare. Flare.
Okay, that dude survived. Crazy.
Flare.
Jimmy is not giving up. Yeah, okay, that's a bit over the top. Ah, shit. Slay. Oh.
Flare.
Ja, ist doch gut jetzt. Also, Jimmy got hit by a 40 Mike man right to the face.
Flare.
Yeah, such hits should at least render them, I don't know, whatever. But that they are not continuing to try to get a manpad on us. If you get a 40 Mike like that, you might shift your priorities, but oh man, I hope that will be not too crazy in the missions, because that is a bit, yeah, what the heck? Yeah, there is a campaign mode covering Vietnam, Afghanistan, etc. Basically all historical operations of the Gulf War. There will be, when I'm basically done with this last here. Yeah, I hope this will be not too crazy in the missions, because that is a bit arcadey. But okay.
Okay, that's enough. That concludes our practice with countermeasures.
And what is the operational altitude of a modern AC gunship? Up to 2000 meters, yeah. Yeah, they lost definitely, but you can't compare Vietnam to modern ones. The technology level was entirely different, but yeah, most ACs were lost in Vietnam, definitely. I think one or two were lost in, or one was lost in the Gulf War, and that was basically the last one they lost. Then they switched also. At some point they switched the tactics. Daylight missions were similar to Apaches. Apaches also got a very bloody nose in the Gulf War, where they pulled off some operation and got ambushed, losing several Apaches. Which you also see now in the Ukraine war, how a helo or any aircraft that might be prone, or any aircraft that goes into, yeah, what you could describe as area close combat, ranges at ACs and whether they operate basically in modern aerial warfare. That is boxing. Yeah? That's why you have all those aircraft lobbing those JDAMs, small diameter bombs, glide bombs and whatever in order to stay away. What is a manpad? Yeah, they can reach out. Especially a slower target. Yeah, if you fly 20,000 feet, then you're probably safe, but... Okay, let's play the campaign.
further. Ready. Contact vehicle. Field turret.